I'm here today with Warren Bird. If you don't know Warren, he's the brains behind a lot of what you and I know about what's happening in the church today. Warren is with the Leadership Network, and it's not uncommon to find him doing research about churches across America. So, Warren, welcome. It's good to have you here today.
Hey, thank you, and I will send the promised fee for such a nice introduction.
Well, you and I, in fact, before we started today's interview, we're talking about a number of topics, and I'm looking forward to the future to engage another conversation about leadership development and internships and salaries and things like that. But today, I wanted to focus our conversation around Multisite because I know Leadership Network has just recently completed another round of research and has some new findings to share. So tell us a little bit about the research itself and how you arrived at the data that you were able to obtain.
Great. The first thing everybody needs to know is the word free. It's a download available. It's the Leadership Network generis multi-site scorecard. Just go to the leadnet.org website, get it for free. And you can learn far more than we'll talk about on this interview. We, with friends like Tony Morgan and others, we publicized, as broadly as we could. We sent to Leadership Networks a database of multi-site churches, and we ended up with almost 700 different churches, over 700 actually, giving us their read on what it's like to be multi-site. And it was the longest survey we ever did. We had well, would you mind asking a few more questions and a few more options? And people kept staying with it. So we just got a wealth of information from the frontline people who are doing multi-site.
That's great. And a lot of great information. We'll try to hit on some of the highlights here, but I do encourage you to go to the Leadership Network website and download the full report because I think you're going to find some helpful insights for your church as you're considering next steps. But it's fascinating to see with the multi-sites. It's not just a trendy thing anymore. More and more churches are engaging it, and I think you're finding from your research it's actually helping. As a result of taking a step into multi-site, churches are able to reach more people, and I would argue to do that faster and cheaper.
Yeah, I'm about to say the thing is church planter background. I love church planting. I did a book on church planting. I totally believe it. But we ask people, of those of you who plant churches and do multi-site, of which actually we found out they feed off of each other. If you're a church planter, you're likely to do multi-site. If you're likely to do multi-site, you're likely to plant churches. So they go hand in hand. We said, which one is faster growing in the earlier years? And by far, multi-site was. Not only that, but 85% of the churches we surveyed are growing, that are multi-site, are growing. And the first year campus growth is just amazing. So yes, this is not a vehicle to produce growth so much as churches that are having a momentum, how to multiply and expand that momentum.
That's fantastic. So give us a sense, Warren, of at what point are you seeing churches begin to consider moving into a multi-site strategy?
That's one of the fascinating findings because we've done multi-site surveys now for several years. We've kind of been the largest survey each time. And we've asked the equivalent of a question, at what size were you when you went multi-site? And that number keeps inching down, down, down. It used to be almost exclusively mega churches 2,000 and higher in attendance, and then in the upper thousands. And this latest one, the average size for going multi-site median was 1,200. Now, yes, you have some that are 500, 600, 700 go site. Your churches that are 9,000 multi-site, but the average was 1,100. And the important thing is it keeps inching down.
Well, that's very fascinating. I thought it also interesting when you were looking at what sizes of a group needs to go out to establish a new site for that campus to be viable. It looked like your research gave some insights on what that critical mass might look like.
Yeah, we asked two questions. We said, what was the size of your initial core group? And then what was the size of your initial launch, what does that take to stay viable? And we decided for this one we weren't going to give an average, but we do give a table. And let me explain. We gave just a single number the last time we did it, and everybody said, well, here's what you need to be viable, or here's what. Well, for a church of 800, that's going to be a very different number than a church of 4,000. Mm-hmm. So instead, we, in the free report, did this table that showed for each church strata, those under 1,000, 1,000 to 1999, 2,000 to 2,999, 3,000, and so forth, what was the size of the core group and what was the size that they said they needed to be viable. One other little note, it was interesting the range of responses on what do you need to be viable. And to me, that was because it's model specific. If you're going out and you're going to replicate the sending campus, you're going to do everything just as well, and on that same scale, you're going to have youth group meeting during the week. Well, you need a much bigger viability than if you're going to approach it another way, be in a movie theater, and for certain things, the gathering's going to be on a different campus, like a women's ministry or the youth ministry or so forth.
That's fascinating. Now, Warren, one of the, I think, misconceptions out there, and you alluded to this a bit about the different models of multi-site that are out there. I think one of the misconceptions is this, that if you're going to do multi-site, it means you have to have lots of technology and video teaching at every location. But that's not necessarily true, is it?
No. One of our surprises when we did the 2010 survey, it was roughly a third, and a third, meaning 1/3 was primarily video teaching, 1/3 was primarily in-person live teaching, and 1/3 was a mix of the two. This time, the gain was in in-person teaching. Almost half of multi-sites do in-person teaching, but the more campuses you have, when you hit 4 or more campuses, the more likely that's not your answer, and your answer is instead video. So, go ahead.
Go right ahead.
So the church that opens its second campus, hey, we're downtown and the growth area is on the west side of town, and instead of moving to the west side, we're going to do the both and the win-win. We're going to stay here and go to the west side. They're more likely to have the rotating teaching team. But when they decide now we're going to go on the east area and there's a merger, 20 miles away that we're going to partner with and become a site and all, now you're more likely to do video teaching.
And there you go. You just mentioned the merger word there. It sounds like that more and more churches, when they add locations, many times that's happening because of a merger.
Out of the multi-site campuses come because of merger. Merger in the sense of one pastor saying, hey, we got a great property and a great mission, but we don't have many people and we can't figure out how to reach generation. You've a lot of people and not much space and all kinds of momentum. Is there some way we can partner together? And merger is a nice name for saying in business terminology, it's usually the total acquisition. In theological terminology, it's death, burial, and resurrection. Jim Tomerlin and I actually did a whole book called Better Together on this idea of a lead church and a joining church and how together the mission of Jesus can start a new cycle in a church that's seen its glory days many years ago.
You broke up just a little bit on the very front end of that conversation because you gave a stat related to mergers. What was that stat, Warren? Well,
first, it was brilliant that you lost, but it was 1 out of 3 campuses come by way of a merger.
Very good. All right. So I'm curious then. Here was going to be the follow-up too. Another misconception is I think that for multi-site churches, larger multi-site churches, they're able to pull that off because there are more staff involved. But it looks like just the opposite is happening, that multi-site actually frees up more lay people to engage in the ministry. Is that true?
Half is true what you said. Okay. We ask churches did your lay involvement when you added campuses go up, remain the same, or go down? And to my absolute delight, it was like 87%, 88% reported the increased role of lay participation. That's, well, it makes perfect sense. Hey, I've already got a greeter team here. I've already got a nursery staff. I've already got a whatever. And we need a whole new setup. And you got people who love the vision and are rising out of the woodwork to say, hey, we can be part of that. We could do that. The other part of it, does it require more staff? I don't know that. I do know that a campus pastor is the make or break person, and in the vast majority of cases, it is a paid position, and it is 3/4 or more dedicated to that campus. So at least for one staff position, that is an add-on to the church's budget. That's part of their investment.
Well, and that's the confirmation, too, of the multi-site churches our team has been working with, where there's success, they've learned we need to have a pastor for that congregation, even if it's a multi-site congregation. So that's consistent with what we're seeing as well, Warren. So let me just throw this out to you then. As you were combing through the data and looking at all the new information, for you, what was the biggest surprise?
Well, before I say that, let me just pick up on what you just said. Tony, you are really good at helping churches figure out staffing issues. And multi-site is not just adding another zero, or, you do church differently when you're crossing geographies. And if you need help in how to do that, Tony and Unstuck team can walk you through that. Now, the biggest surprise, I guess the biggest delight, was this lay statistic thing. The biggest surprise was probably that the inching down. Well, that wouldn't be the biggest surprise. The biggest surprise was that the average multi-site church is just 4 years old. Now, yes, we had ones that were 23, 22, 21 years, but that half of the churches have gone multi-site for the first time in the last 4 years, which just says this is multiplying and growing. And then we ask all the churches that are multi-site, what is the likelihood that you will plant another campus within the next 12 months? And half said yes to that.
Wow. So
those two numbers tell you that this multi-site thing is not a fad. It is expanding. It's becoming the new normal, just like, in yesteryear, going from one church service to two. And now pretty much, the vast majority of churches have two churches. And that's just like, oh, yeah, that's how you do church. I think that's the new normal for multi-site. Is going to be an ingredient that's a very easy ingredient to incorporate.
And finally, did you see, sometimes you're able to look at information like this and kind of see the bleeding edge, the new frontier as it relates to multi-site. Is there anything that you're seeing kind of on the bleeding edge that we need to pay attention to, Warren?
Well, the fun piece, at the top of the interview, we talked about church planning and multi-site, and it's like it's two different camps. And yes, you have, the Mark Driscoll, okay, you plant a campus or you're part of Acts 29. Christian, you one of our camp, or you're part of the network. But on the end, those and others, there's a real blurring. It's like, well, I don't know whether this is going to be a standalone campus or a church plant. Let's kind of unpack as we go, because there's a lot of the same leadership skills and heart for reaching people that's behind a church plant that's also behind a multi-site. And that's perhaps why when you go to a church planter conference like Exponential, you find a lot of people talking about multi-site as well.
Yeah, that's very good. All right, Warren, again, give us, for those folks that want the full report and all the additional information, which I hear is free. Is that true?
FREE, yes. A big, long report, co-sponsored by Generis. That's in part why it can be free. And by the way, they have a great section in there on financial advice about churches going multi-site. Very helpful in our report. But you just go to leaddebt.org, and then in the search box, type the word scorecard, because it's the Leadership Network Generis Multi-Site Church Scorecard, and the report comes right up.
Very good. Warren, as always, it's fun to hear what you're learning about churches across the country, and I'm sure we'll have another conversation in the not so distant future about a new project that you're on. So thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you, Tony. I follow your blog every day. It's outstanding. I follow you on Twitter, and I'm Twitter at Warren Bird, very simply.
Very good. Thanks again, Warren.
Bye now.